Take a break, Adamu. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Everest Plateau. Give me a little volume there on the headphones, buddy. Or turn it up. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. That's good. Thank you. And so we got an interesting show for you guys this week. We've been talking about this and this idea of the rabbit hole. So the last time we did this was, what, it was in the 70s? Did we look this up?
Yeah, we looked it up. I can't remember when it was.
It was a while back, yeah. So we were thinking that maybe this is something we should do every 100 episodes or so.
Yeah.
Basically to kind of update where we are in general. And also to give people who listen to the show a place, possibly, for new listeners to start. Because it kind of will give a kind of an overview of what's going on in our heads.
Yeah.
So
totally
yeah,
unprepared.
Yeah.
Just
yeah, it's got to be on the fly.
Yeah, on the fly.
Yeah. That's how we do it here at Brothers of the Serpent. And okay, so agriculturally speaking, we're getting really close to harvest. We're finished bottling. Well, we had
For
to.
now.
Yeah, we had to. We had some extra because we didn't have enough bottles, so we've got 3 barrels that we didn't get to bottle. We thought there were going to be 2, but there ended up being 3. Right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I didn't count properly.
Math is hard.
But we had one pallet of bottles that was on, it was like, there was an inventory a snafu, and we didn't get the amount that we ordered, which we would have had enough to bottle it all.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's going to age longer in the barrel, which is good for it. I mean, it's going to be better wine.
Yeah.
Really. So we'll just be releasing that later.
Yep.
And the bricks, which is percent sugar measurement in the grapes, is at 20 on the cab and also 20 on the Monty. 20.2 on the cab.
And our goal is 24, 26-ish.
Yeah, between there. I mean, it'd be nice if the cab was even at 27, but
that's not going to happen.
Probably not. pH is going to skyrocket before.
Right, yeah, because it's at this point.
We just want them to be ripe, because the cab has a really strong herbal smell when it's not quite ripe. When it's still a little bit green, like if the seeds have any green in them, you get this bell pepper, sort of cut grass, asparagus, this green smell.
Yeah.
And
so you wait a little longer and the seeds kind of brown a little bit and you get less of that.
You get less of that. And it's called, the chemical compound is called methoxypyrazines.
Ah.
And that's what gives it that green smell.
Yeah.
So we're wanting less of those.
Right. So it's a juggling act because you have the sugar content, and then you have the pH, and then you have the actual ripeness. And you're watching the pH rise along with the sugar, and you're trying to target a certain amount of sugar without the pH being too ridiculously high, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your sugar is all about, the alcohol content.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
But so what they say in the industry is you want your cab to be big and bold, and so you want it to have a higher alcohol. Changes the mouthfeel of the wine. Yeah. But, I mean, I've had plenty of great wines that were 12, 13%.
Yeah.
But I guess...
What was the percentage of the stuff we just bottled,
I think it was 13.5.
Yeah, okay. 13.5, yeah.
Yeah, I got the numbers somewhere, but...
yeah, well, I mean, people were asking me, like, what's the alcohol? I'm like,
yeah, it's 13.5.
Probably 13-ish,
like around there.
13, 14, yeah.
Okay. And it's a high pH wine. I mean, one of them is like 4.1.
Yeah.
Which is high for
That's
wine.
High. Yeah.
It's like, I guess ideally you want 3.6 or 3.8.
Yeah.
For a red, and even lower for whites. But it does contribute to the flavor profile and the mouthfeel of the wine, the higher pHs, and it can be smoother.
Yeah.
But, you risk... It's just risky because the higher the pH, the more opportunity for microbial spoilage.
Yeah.
in the
Right.
wine. So as long as it doesn't spoil, it's great.
Yeah. Right.
But, you know, they say you want a wine to last 10 years on the shelf, and with a wine with a pH that high, probably not.
Probably
not going to last that long.
Right. So drink it when you get it.
That's right. And we can't ship out of state, so I know a lot of people have been asking about that, but we're working on it.
Yeah. And even the stuff we're working on is still in country, right? I don't know if they do international shipping.
Yeah.
Right. So
I don't know. Don't know much about it. It's not my department.
Right. Yeah. It's not our job. Okay. What about the band? $50 Dynasty. What are you guys doing? You're
still working on mixes and exporting. So these project files that I have in Logic Pro, 10, I think is what I have. They're massive, and I've got all kinds of effects and things that, you know, in some, mostly on the vocals, but a few on guitars and stuff, not too much stuff on the drums, but things that I've applied within that DAW, the DAW, Digital Audio Workstation. And so if I have to go through every song and decide, do I want to send this, do I want to print this effect into the file?
Yeah.
And send that track, like if it's a vocal track, with that effect embedded? Or do I want to give the mix engineer the option to
use his own effects,
to do his own thing?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a tough decision sometimes. And then there's different ways of exporting if you want to do that. Sometimes it makes it a stereo file, which makes the file 2 channels instead of 1.
Yeah.
If you've got a stereo effect. So, you know, the last one we did ended up being 60 tracks. Plus, there's maybe even more because I ended up separating a bunch of vocals that were grouped. I like had choir effects and just put 4 vocals together.
Right.
And, you know, I ended up separating them out. So it's just, I've been working on that for another song, and I got every track prepared. You know, you don't want anything that like clips right when it's coming in. You want nice fade ins and stuff. So there's no little artifacts that'll pop out in a mix. So you just got to go in and clean up stuff, and you got to make a lot of decisions. And then, so I never actually exported any of the tracks. I just worked on the song for almost 12 hours.
Oh, shit.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to be that way for most songs and sometimes more.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of stuff like, you know, this is not the right sound. Like this one little vocal part or something, and then I jumped in there and just like recorded another little piece. And then I figured out that we actually made a mistake, and I was playing a major 7, and Ty's guitars weren't playing a major 7 at this one part, and I'm like, oh my God, this sounds terrible together. But you couldn't hear it in the whole mix, but I'm like, no, this is bad.
Yeah.
So I'm going to re-record the acoustic on the choruses.
Oh.
Which that's, you know, doesn't take long, but it's another thing.
Yeah, the old wrong chord trick.
Yeah, I was like, you guys didn't study the material before you went into the studio to record your parts. And that happens. I mean,
Professionals, ladies and gentlemen. Still playing the wrong chords.
it made it look like I was playing the wrong chord.
Right,
But
no, yeah.
I wrote the song,
Yeah.
so I know I was playing the right chord.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and do Space Weather News. Now that we got our agricultural and rock and roll update, got a Space Weather update from spaceweather.com. Almost spotless solar flare. Earlier today, on August 9th, the spotless sun produced a C1 class solar flare. Upon closer inspection, the sun might not be spotless after all, and a new sunspot is emerging from that blast site. Yeah, and it's interesting because their list here says sunspot number is 11. So I guess they decided after writing this that, yeah, the sun actually has 11 spots, not 0. Rare naked eye nova. Every 20 years or so, a thermonuclear explosion occurs on the surface of RS OPH, or OPH, OPH, a white dwarf in the constellation Ophiuchus. Yesterday, it happened again. On August 8th, the brightness of this tiny star increased 600-fold, from magnitude 12 to 5. Keith Geary of Ireland was the first to notice. Hours later, Italian astronomer Ernesto Guido and colleagues photographed the outburst using a remote-controlled telescope in Australia. This is called a recurrent nova, and it is very rare. In the whole Milky Way galaxy, only 7 star systems are known to produce such explosions. So
Wow, that's really cool. Hey, and that was on the Cosmographia birthday.
Yeah, and so this ties in a bit. Well, we'll talk about it. Let me finish the article here. So RS-OF is a binary star, or OFF. It's a very lopsided one. On one side is a white dwarf, and the other side is a red giant. There's very little distance between the two, so the gravity of the white dwarf is able to pull gaseous material off of the larger star and down onto itself. And every couple of decades, enough matter accumulates to trigger an explosion. The last time this happened was in 2006. At fifth magnitude, the current outburst is visible to the unaided eye, just barely. Binoculars or a telescope will allow you to see it with ease. Look south after sunset. Ophiuchus hangs high in the sky just above the better-known constellations Scorpius and Sagittarius. So yeah, I just wanted to remind everybody when we talked about this, Type 1a supernova.
Yeah, stellar nucleosynthesis episode.
Yeah, well, and the Type 1a supernova specifically about measuring distances using magnitudes.
That's right.
It was about white dwarves pulling material in, and then they
there's a threshold.
They go past the Chandrasekhar limit, and then the star completely unbinds itself and becomes a supernova. That's not what is happening here.
Oh,
this is a recurrent nova, so this star is not passing that limit
threshold. Okay.
So I wonder, and they're saying that this is a rare thing, but there are 7 star systems that do this. In other words, recurrent novas, right? So I know that those of you who are interested in, for example, electric universe or plasma universe and micronovas with our sun will be interested in this data. So if you want more information on it, go to spaceweather.com for August 9th, and you can see the article there, and they've got a bunch of links about this process. And the other systems that produce it. Because, you know, in the plasma/electric universe model, and some other people have theorized about this. I know Mario Build Reps talks about micronovas and the possibility that our sun may every once in a while have a... It's hard for me to imagine a star exploding just a little bit, right? That's it because a nova is pretty much the entire star shoving a bunch of material off of it. It's shedding material due to like some kind of collapse of its core, right? But this particular kind of recurrent nova is very specific, and it takes a white dwarf to do it. So the white dwarf is already a collapsed star. It's already gone through its long life cycle process of being like our sun, right? And then it runs out of fuel, and then its core collapses and it novas and blows off most of its outer material, and then you end up with this incredibly tiny, incredibly dense, we talked about this, electron gas material, right? It's not quite, it doesn't have enough mass to become a neutron star, which is where the gravity is so high that it shoves the electrons into the protons and they cancel each other out and become neutrons, and then it's just a ton of neutrons sitting there next to each other. Instead, this is called electron degenerate gas. So it's all the electrons are completely filling up all of their possible quantum phase states. That's how it's phrased. I don't even know what that means, but the point is that it's incredibly dense material. It's no longer on fire like a normal star is, but it's glowing because it's got residual heat, and they take... I mean, there's all kinds of theories on how long do they take to cool down, you know, but a white dwarf is probably going to remain that way for billions of years. It's going to be really hot. And there's a concept, an interesting concept in astronomy, of the idea of a black dwarf, which would be a white dwarf that has been
cooled down.
It's not next to another star, drawing material from it. So it's been able to sit out there in space and just by radiation cool itself down. But
so then does it no longer exist as a gas? Does it change its phase state?
No, it just is. You can't see it anymore because it's like small. It's like the size of Earth or maybe our moon, and yet it's the same temperature as like the background of space. So it's almost at absolute zero. It's like 2 Kelvin or something like that. Whatever the microwave background is, because that's the only thing heating it up at that point.
Yeah.
So it's completely black and tiny and incredibly dense. So it's very dangerous if you're just kind of flying around in space and you get close to it. You won't ever see it, and it'll just suck your spaceship in, and you're done. It's game over.
Well, it might be a little bit hotter than the background because it would be pulling in little objects.
Right. If it was passing through, yeah, that's right. You're right. It would have a. It would have.
You'd have to have a really sensitive instrument to be able to detect it. Yeah.
Yeah, or you would just have to see it based on it affecting other things around it by gravity. Same way, with a black hole. Like it may have an accretion disk or something.
Yeah.
But the point is that according to the standard model right now, there are no black dwarfs because there hasn't been enough time in the lifetime of the universe for them to cool down.
Man, I bet you could make some good pancakes on one of those.
Yeah.
Nice and flat.
Not a cold one, though. I won't cook it. Yeah. Pan
I don't like them when they swell up real thick. You got to mash them down.
I got a good flat pancake.
That's right.
So anyway, this is a white dwarf that is not going through the process of unbinding. So I wonder what the difference is, because this is implying that the reason this is happening is because it's very, very close to its binary companion.
Mm.
So I wonder if it approaches the Chandrasekhar limit too quickly, and the explosion takes place, and it's thermonuclear. Like, in other words, it doesn't, because the other Type 1a supernova, the material is being leached onto the star, and it is taking place slowly enough to where that material is spread out and converted into the degenerate material that the rest of the star is. And then once that star reaches a certain mass limit of all that degenerate material, then it undergoes a catastrophic fusion process in a state in which it can't, the particles can't move because they're in this quantum phase state that's locked. So the whole thing explodes. It completely, and the thermonuclear reaction takes place very quickly. The entire star does it all at once. Right. In this case, because it's so close to its binary companion, the material is being leached onto it so quickly that it doesn't have time to all turn into that degenerate gas before it actually undergoes fusion again and explodes just the outside layer. So it's a recurrent nova without destroying the source.
That's pretty cool.
It's really interesting. Yeah, and a rare thing. So it's kind of counterintuitive to me. I would have thought it would be the other way around, but after I thought about it, I was like, okay, I guess what's happening is the material that the star is leaching onto it's pouring onto there so quickly that it doesn't have time to turn into the degenerate material. So it's basically got this thick layer of regular mass on the outside of the star, and once it builds up enough of that, that stuff just explodes. But the interior part of the star doesn't take part in that nova.
God.
Yeah.
So many details.
Yep. All right. So
try to understand.
Current conditions. Solar wind speed is 350.4 kilometers per second. The density is 12 protons per cubic centimeter. Sunspot number is 11. The neutron count today is 8.3% above the space age average. And they do have I just wanted to add, they have a graph here showing this data. And it looks to me like the most recent low was in 2016. And it was at like almost -5%. Like, we've never seen a reading that low as when we've been reading this on the podcast. They've always been at least above 7% above, right? Mm-hmm. But this reading in 2016 is it's below 0, and it almost reaches -5. But it says on here that the minimum of all the data they've ever measured was 32.1% below the space age average. And that was measured in 1991. Whereas the high was in 2009, and that was 11.7% above the average. So there's that. And then the KP index right now is 0, and the 24-hour max is 2, both rated as quiet.
All right. And crypto update. Bitcoin is at $45,640.
Hey.
And Ethereum, $3,109.
All right.
So, yeah, looking pretty good on the old crypto front.
Yep.
And I got a series of stories here, all connected.
Okay.
Or maybe no, nah, they're not connected. Okay.
Totally unconnected
Totally
stories.
unconnected stories from space.com. And these are a couple weeks old. Flashing meteor that exploded over Norway landed somewhere in a nearby forest. The meteor shook the air and created a sonic boom as it passed overhead. The hunt for fragments of an unusually large meteor that lit up the skies over Norway on the 25th of July has begun. The meteor awakened awestruck residents of the country's capital city, also, that's the name of the capital city, with the sound of a large explosion. Footage shows the fireball from the meteor streaking across the sky in a trail of bright flashes at around 1 a.m. local time Sunday morning before it landed somewhere in a forest near Ulso.
Is that the one that was green, where they got the picture of it? It's a line with green.
I don't know.
No, okay, because there was one and people were like, I recognize a Death Star test fire. I want to see one.
That's probably one of these. The rumbling of the meteor startled numerous residents and led to calls to Norwegian emergency services. Though no injuries or damage have been reported yet, the Norwegian police said. The Norwegian Meteor Network, NMN, a group that monitors meteor activity in the country, has analyzed video footage of the extraplanetary visitor's trajectory to pinpoint its landing site, which the group believes to be somewhere in the Finnemarka Forest, located 40 miles from Ulso. So there's that. Oh, the meteor was traveling up to 43,200 miles per hour, or 72,000 kilometers per hour.
What?
I know, this sent me on an immediate rabbit hole. I was just like, whoa, 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 whoa. So I looked this up, and no, those two numbers do not correlate in the same way. So I don't know why the rounding, whoever figured the miles rounded it off, and then whoever figured the kilometers rounded it off, and they did it in different ways because they are not the same. I can't remember which is like.
So the question is are the people looking for the meteor out in the forest going to come back still human?
The question is, whoever wrote this story probably just maybe did some extra rounding.
Yeah, I know.
But I mean, come on. 43,200 miles per hour, or 72,000 kilometers per hour.
I'm just predicting they're going to come back out of the forest and be like, we found the meteor. We are fine.
Billet, not sure who he is, probably mentioned earlier in the story, told Reuters news agency that the meteor was deflected to Earth when it hit our solar system's asteroid belt while traveling between Mars and Jupiter. But further details about the otherworldly arrival remain elusive. With an object of this size, it's nearly impossible to get an overview of absolutely everything, Billet said. It would have been easier had it had a steeper course. We don't know yet whether it was a rock or an iron meteorite. From experience, it's more likely to be a rock, but we can't draw conclusions yet.
Yeah.
Stone or rock meteorites tend to have formed on the surface or crust of a planet or large asteroid, whereas iron ones come from the planet or asteroid's core. The NMN conducted a search for fragments from the meteor Sunday morning and into the afternoon. The group suspects that, given the tough-to-find location somewhere in the middle of a forest, any meteorite fragments could take up to 10 years to discover.
Wow.
Okay.
Carbonaceous chondrite, I think, is what they call the stony ones.
Next story from space.com. Fireball streaks across North Texas, creating light show and sonic boom. Hundreds of people witnessed the flash. A fireball streaked across North Texas last night, leading to several hundred witness reports of a bright flash and sonic boom. The celestial drama occurred around 9 p.m. local time on Sunday, July 25th. According to CBS Dallas-Fort Worth, the nonprofit American Meteor Society, AMS, has since recorded 213 reports of the fireball, including 3 videos. The witnesses were mostly in northern Texas, but some reports seeing the fireball above Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Videos of that fireball show a large object streaking across the sky for a few seconds. Most people who reported seeing the fireball estimated that it lasted between 3 and 4 seconds. About 14 people who saw the object said it made a sound as it streaked through the sky. And so they go on to describe what a meteor is again. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Any other details about the meteor? Let's see what they say here. Thousands of small meteorites hit Earth each year, though most fall unnoticed into the ocean or into unpopulated regions. Many thousands more bits of rock and space dust burn up completely in the atmosphere, visible only as meteors. The next best opportunity to see meteors is in August, when Earth will pass through the lingering debris left by Swift-Tuttle Comet, creating the annual meteor shower known as the Perseids. We didn't set up a party to watch that.
No, we didn't.
These meteors are too tiny and fragile to reach Earth, but they create a light show of up to 100 shooting stars per hour. Okay.
It's been real hazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I have gone out and looked up, and
last night it was actually pretty nice.
The other night when I was down here, I was outside and I was looking up, and it was like the clearest night we've had in a long time. I was able to see the full Milky Way, and the moon was not up, and but yeah, it's been hazy and muggy, and which is kind of,
we had another influx of African dust.
Yeah, and maybe smoke from the fires. I don't know.
Okay, final story. This is from livescience.com. An asteroid about as long as the Great Pyramid of Giza is tall made a close approach with Earth on Sunday, July 25th, according to NASA calculations. There is no worry that the space rock poses any threat to Earth, but NASA monitors such rocks to both learn more about the early solar system. Asteroids are rocky fragments from that time, and because if their orbits were to change, the asteroid could pose a future risk to Earth. On its closest approach, the near-Earth asteroid, called 2008 GO20, swung within 2.8 million miles of our blue marble, about 8 times further away than the Moon. It will be trekking at a whopping 18,000 miles per hour, according to new reports. That's 29,000 kilometers per hour for those of you across the pond. The rock is estimated to be anywhere from 318 to 720 feet across, or 97 to 220 meters. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands at 450 feet, or 138 meters tall. Any space rock larger than about 490 feet, or 150 meters across, that is expected to make a shave with Earth within 4.6 million miles is considered a potentially hazardous asteroid. For comparison, that distance is 19.5 times the span between Earth and the Moon. And in reality, that distance doesn't hold a candle to the closest known flyby of an asteroid, at least one that didn't smash into us, which occurred on August 16th of 2020, when 2020 QG zipped just 1,830 miles above the Indian Ocean. Live Science sister site Space.com reported, such little space rocks pose no danger to life on Earth. On the other hand, 2008 G020 is a potentially hazardous because over time the gravitational tug of the planets could change the object's orbital path so that it crosses Earth's orbit.
Yeah.
If that were to happen, a future collision with our planet is possible, NASA said. This isn't the first time 2008 GO20 has visited Earth's quarters. It made its closest approach on August 4th, 1901, when the asteroid swung to roughly 807,000 miles of our planet, according to NASA records. Its next closest flyby happened on July 31st of 1935 at a distance of 1.15 million miles. And then when it next flies by Earth on July 24th, 2034, it will get as close as 3.1 million miles. But isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It flies, it makes its closest approach on Sunday, the 25th.
Yeah.
The same day that two different
large bolides come into the atmosphere.
One of them landed.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
yeah, is it dragging debris?
Surely it's got, and they're like, we wonder where these came from. It's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm way off, but it just,
that is interesting.
Seems too coincidental.
Yeah.
It's got a train.
Yeah.
A gaggle.
Right. It's part of a cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
just want to go take a break and get into the.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
I got emails.
Oh yeah. Well, let's do some.
Let's do some emails. All right. This is from Kevin. And it's called Mammoth Springs down the road from Duck Creek. It says, hey, bros, I would like to tell you about my experiences around Mammoth Springs, Utah. From spring 2008 to spring 2009, I took a year off from work, camping. I reached the burnout limit, working 6 to 7, 10, or 12-hour days in my trade for 19 years, and I finally said, fuck it, I'm taking some time off. I am not married, and my friends had jobs, so most of the time I was alone. I camped all over from south of 70 down into Arizona and all over Nevada and up the California coast, from Redding up through Oregon and Washington. It was an awesome time. I had 3 really weird experiences around the Mammoth Springs area, and I would like to share them with you guys. First one, I'm camping. Middle of the night, I wake up and something wasn't right. I closed my eyes to go back to sleep and something came over me. I don't know if I couldn't move or I wouldn't move, but I was frozen. I saw a whitish light through my eyelids. It was like on Aliens 2 in the beginning shuttle scanning scene. The light started at my head and then to my feet and then back up again at least twice. So it was like scanning him.
Wow.
I always have my Glock 21 right next to me. I didn't grab it. I don't know if I couldn't grab it or I knew inside I didn't need to. Okay, second experience at Mammoth. I was on my 2nd or 3rd day there camping. There are like 5 to 6 dispersed sites there. The weekend was over and I found myself all alone. I cooked breakfast that morning, ate, cleaned dishes, then finally started enjoying the outdoors. It wasn't 20 minutes later that I got the worst feeling I have ever had in the mountains in my life. Something was there, and it didn't want me there. I packed up and got the F out of there.
Whoa.
Look, I have camped all over the lower 48 and a little up in Alaska. That is the only time over the years that I have had that feeling. And my 3rd strange experience there, maybe a month before my first weird experience, something strange happened. It was just weird. I found out what I saw was a thing about a month ago when I heard some podcast bring it up. I had my truck fixed up by then, and I had a bed platform raised to the windows of my truck shell so I could see out the window. Anyway, I went to bed, and then I woke up later. Out of my window across Mammoth Creek, there was a full moon, and I could see a woman walking down the path. She wore what looked to be a white nightie to me. I only remember thinking about how beautiful she was. And when I woke up in the morning, I remember thinking, what the hell was she doing out there in the middle of the night, walking around alone? Really strange to me at the time. And I will never forgive you guys for putting the vision of hermaphrodite long skulls into my head, but I do love your podcast. What? Snakes! Yeah, those are weird experiences, man. But I'm interested, like you said, you heard about this on some other podcast. What was it? It sounds like a classic woman in white story, which is, so many places that are supposed to be haunted have, a woman in white ghost. It's a classic apparition.
I wonder how many people, like, these missing people from, like the stories of Missing 411 get that feeling.
Yeah.
Before they vanish.
Right.
And, like, ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The feeling of, like, something doesn't want me here.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then instead of leaving, you're just like, what?
I'm just.
Yeah. Or you run into the woods, like panicked. I don't know. But yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, thanks for those experiences, man. There's that one with the scanning. That's really interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Your spleen looks good. All right, let's go.
Yeah. Let's see. This is ooh, this one's really long. Really long. Wow. I cannot read that. Okay, that's way too long. Sorry, buddy. Let's see. This is from, well, I'll just get the beginning, but man, I just realized how ridiculously long this is. But it's from Ivan, and he says it's called Hidden History of the Human Race. Comments. It says, greetings, Snake Bros and Snake Sister. I am writing to you from New Zealand, so please excuse any differences in spelling. But as a former British colony, which wasn't settled by convicts like Australia, we still use the Queen's English down here. But it probably doesn't sound like that. Although most of the time we speak and write Kiwi English, which is mostly unintelligible to anyone other than Kiwis. Anyway, with that being said, I have been listening to your show for about a year now and enjoy your brand of informed ignorance, expressed with levity and humility. I appreciate the way that you interrogate a subject with insightful questions, which help the listener delineate between what's actually been established as factually accurate and what's really just a bunch of skirp-tart opinion. I especially enjoy the book reports, which is something that sets your show apart from other podcasts that cover a lot of the same subjects. Having now listened to part 4 of Hidden History of the Human Race, I thought your discussion about why so much of the earlier discoveries were rejected and why the current neo-Darwinist paradigm is defended so vociferously identified the overarching reason which we see throughout the history of science. Namely, whenever a theory or paradigm is established, which then becomes the scientific consensus, it is extremely difficult to change it, or for its adherents to publicly acknowledge that the theory is in crisis or has deficiencies in its explanatory powers. This is very much the situation today. The following quote from the philosopher Thomas Nagel encapsulates the issue nicely. The materialist neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false.
Wow.
Contrary to the way the theory is presented in the popular science press and general media, scientists have recognized for some time now, especially since the discovery of DNA and the advances in our ability to analyze microbiological systems, that the theory has serious problems. And he's got a quote here. For example, in November 2016, the Royal Society in London held a conference called New Trends in Evolutionary Biology. The headline talk was given by evolutionary theorist Professor Gerd Mueller, and his talk was entitled Explanatory Deficits of the Modern Synthesis. As part of that talk, he listed the following 5 explanatory deficits: phenotypic complexity, phenotypic novelty, non-gradual modes of transition, non-genetic factors of change, and biases in the generation of variation. The key takeaway from that list is that this covers everything of significance that needs explaining in the history of life on Earth and therefore should be explained by Darwin's theory. Then, a couple of years later in Salzburg, Austria, a meeting was held entitled Evolution, Genetic Novelty / Genomic Variations by RNA Networks and Viruses. The headline from that meeting was, quote, "For more than a half century, it has been accepted that new genetic information is mostly derived from random, error-based events. Now it is recognized that errors cannot explain genetic novelty and complexity," unquote. Wow. So probably the biggest issue, which speaks to the points raised in Hidden History of the Human Race, is that the fossil record itself does not support the theory. To quote from Chief Scarptard Richard Dawkins, quote, "Evolution not only is a gradual process as a matter of fact, it has to be gradual if it is to do any explanatory work," unquote. However, what the fossil record actually shows is long periods of stasis punctuated by discontinuities and an absence of transitional fossils. Again, contrary to the way the theory is presented as an established fact, supported by indisputable evidence, the reality is that there are still no observed examples of one species gradually evolving into a distinctly different one. The fossil record cannot show even one example of a finely graded series of intermediates moving from one form to a distinctly different one. The closest that it comes to is that in a small number of cases where 5 or so forms can be imaginatively arranged to suggest a possible evolutionary pathway. A favorite example often cited is the evolution of the whale from an ancestral land mammal. But even in this case, there are only 5 or 6 intermediates posited, and it would have required many more gradually evolving transitional forms. Furthermore, from studies of population genetics, there does not appear to be enough time for the purported transitions to take place. This is the waiting time problem. There is a known rate at which any beneficial mutation becomes fixed in any given population. And then there is the problem of the hundreds, if not thousands, of irreducibly complex systems in whales that would make their gradual evolution impossible. To quote another Scarptard on this subject, "We must conclude that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical system, only a variety of wishful speculations." This is from Franklin Harold, Professor Emeritus of Biochemistry at Colorado State. However, even if the transition were perfectly documented with intermediate forms, it still would not answer the how questions. How did the features needed for fully aquatic environment originate? How would the hind limbs of a sea lion-type creature turn into a fluke, which is very different? How would a male's testicles become simultaneously internalized and surrounded by countercurrent heat exchange systems? How would a female develop specialized nursing organs to inject milk forcibly into her calf? Indeed, why would any of these changes occur? To use the sea lion example, they are already well adapted to their amphibious lives. As a final point to all this whale talk, it's interesting to go back and look at what Darwin himself had to say on the subject. This is what Darwin wrote in the first edition of Origin of Species regarding the observations of North American black bears. Quote, swimming for hours with widely open mouth, thus catching, like a whale, insects in the water. Even in so extreme a case as this, if the supply of insects were constant, and if better adapted competitors did not already exist in the country, I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered, by natural selection, more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till the creature was produced as monstrous as a whale, unquote. Even critics at the time laughed at how ridiculous this idea was, and so Darwin removed this passage from future editions of the book. However, we know from his private letters that he continued to believe this fanciful tale. This kind of magical thinking continues to permeate the whole field of evolutionary studies. The one place we would definitely expect to find actual evidence of evolution, which could be replicated in the lab, would be with bacteria. Their life cycles are short enough that if an experiment was run for a long time, we would expect to see, at minimum, some evidence of beneficial mutations being fixed in a population, and ideally an actual transition from one type of bacteria to another species. Fortunately, there is such an experiment being run currently. Michigan State University biologist Richard Linsky's long-term evolution experiment, or LTEE. The LTEE is his more than 3 decades long project in which E. coli was allowed to grow continuously in laboratory flasks simply to observe how it would evolve. As an aside, 3 decades is the equivalent of thousands, if not millions, of years of evolution. The results have been that almost all of the beneficial mutations that were discovered to have spread through the populations of bacteria in the LTEE were ones that either blunted pre-existing genes, which was decreasing their previous biochemical activity, or outright broke them. In other words, the bacteria devolved, not evolved. As I love to quote skirptards undercutting their own theories, here's a summary of the situation from bacteriologist Alan Linton. Quote, bacteria, the simplest form of independent life, are ideal for this kind of study, with generation times of 20 to 30 minutes and populations achieved after 18 hours. But throughout 150 years of the science of bacteriology, there is no evidence that one species of bacteria has changed into another, unquote. Additionally, to circle back to the discussion of why there is such a commitment to a theory that is no more credible today than other discredited theories such as eugenics, the answer lies in the fact that evolution is predicated on methodological naturalism or materialism, which are actually philosophical or metaphysical positions. It's no accident that strident critics of neo-Darwinism call it more like a religion or cult than a scientific theory. That is why any criticism is met with such hostility, and critics are labeled as creationists, regardless of the merits of any actual arguments they are making. You see that exact scenario play out in the origin of life debate. Even though there are a number of theories proposed, such as the RNA world hypothesis, there is no agreed upon theory, supported by evidence, of how life arose from merely chemical processes. At minimum, it requires a whole bunch of chemicals on the early Earth to somehow magically form the first replicating molecule. Every attempt in the lab to make this happen has failed, and scientists have been trying for decades. So, even taking that history into account, the standard skirptard position is to say, quote, even though we don't know how life got started, we know that there is a materialist explanation, but we just haven't found it yet, unquote. However, that is not a scientific statement. That is a philosophical or metaphysical statement. The scientific method of inquiry is not to start with an a priori commitment to only certain kinds of evidence and ignore anything you don't like or agree with. Furthermore, the obvious follow-up question to the skirptard is, how long do we have to wait for this materialist explanation? 50 years, 100, or 1,000? This line of reasoning is what the philosopher of science Karl Popper called promissory materialism, and it is a feature, not a bug, of the whole neo-Darwinist theory. Finally, to expand on that opening quote from Thomas Nagel, if naturalism is true, then rationality has no foundation. Darwin himself recognized the problem as he stated, quote, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind? Unquote. So, neo-Darwinism is ultimately self-refuting. If everything is the result of natural forces, then even our own thoughts are simply natural results of some or all of the 4 fundamental forces of physics working on the matter inside our heads. If that is so, then all of our thoughts are no more rational than any other physical processes, and we have no basis for believing them to be valid or true, including, of course, neo-Darwinism itself. Hence, the realization that it is entirely self-refuting and why Nagel's statement that Darwin's conception of nature is almost certainly false rings true. Sorry for rambling on so long. I know you have a backlog of emails to read, so I totally understand if you decide not to read this email on the show. I just hope it can add something to the discussion around the issues raised by the book reading of Hidden History of the Human Race. Keep up the good work, bros. Best regards, Ivan. And P.S. Snakes! Okay, I decided to read the whole thing. It was really good.
That was really good, yeah.
Yeah.
Well written.
Yes, very well written. And yeah, that whole, there was a whole lot in here, but the promissory materialism, I'm familiar with this argument, this idea that like, where they say, well, we don't have the explanation yet, but we will. Just give us time, right? This is something that happens in neuroscience as well, with like human thought and memories and all that kind of stuff. It's like, we don't have an explanation for consciousness yet, but just give us time, and we will have a totally materialist explanation for it eventually. So stop looking at any other theories because those are bullshit. It's going to be materialism as soon as we figure it out. And that's really, the question of looking for a materialist explanation for consciousness, that's fine. But to say that there will be one, and so all other avenues of possible explanations are worthless because the answer is certainly going to be the materialist one, is the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem, right? And that's what he calls the promissory materialist explanation.
Yeah.
We don't have it yet, but we will, and it's going to be a materialist one, so stop looking at other stuff.
Yeah.
Don't fund anything else, all that kind of thing. So yeah, that's... and there, I always see when we get into these type of debates, people send us, like, oh, look at this bottlefly evolution thing, and look at this bacterial evolution thing, and so you're implying that these experiments have not worked, and you've got quotations and actual names for them. So that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to dig into some of this stuff more deeply. All right.
Yeah. That was a great email.
Yeah, really good. Are we done?
I don't have any. I don't have any more emails.
I have a ton. Should we take a break?
Probably. Yeah.
All right. We'll be right back, guys. Thanks.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast. And we are going to begin again down the rabbit hole. So this is always cool when you get into a conversation with somebody who's new to this type of research, I guess. How do you approach somebody? That's what I always wonder, and I always try different methods.
Yeah,
to do it,
Well, let's start out with. If this is going to be used for possible new people, new listeners, let's start out with actual introductions. So I'm Russ Allen, and you are
Kyle Allen.
We're brothers, and we started this podcast because we've been having these kinds of conversations, exploring mysteries, ancient sites, aliens, conspiracies, all kinds of stuff with each other for years, and then we both started listening to podcasts, and we got interested in the conversations people were having with each other through this medium, and we decided, we should try doing one ourselves. And Kyle already had the studio because he does music, and so we already had a lot of the equipment, and Kyle had a lot of the skills to be able to record it, so we didn't have to learn any of that. So that's why we started the show, and the focus of the podcast is mostly ancient mysteries, but there are some modern ones like the missing person stuff.
Yeah, and just physics in general, science.
Yeah, so we do physics. Yeah, that's right. And So that's a real brief reason for the podcast.
We also are joined by the Watcher.
That's right.
Brett England, and he is. We pulled him in the early days because there would be little facts that we needed.
We needed an on-the-fly fact checker.
And it was like, oh, what was the name of that book? Or what was the author's name? Or just,
what
various
was the
things
date
like
of
that.
this thing? Yeah.
And so after we had been publishing a number of episodes, the Watcher was already sending us giant blocks of text like, hey, you got this wrong, and this is actually pronounced like this, and actually that guy was doing this other work in 1989, not what you said.
Yep.
And then, throwing in his 2 cents on the topics, and we were just like, hey, you're a perfect fit.
Because he also was involved in a lot of the conversations we used to have.
Oh, yeah.
We were just like, yeah, okay, why don't you join the show as a show observer and a watcher and like on the fly fact checker, and it really helped the quality of the show for sure.
Yeah,
that's right.
So that's who we are.
Yeah. So then, all the music for the show is made in house. I probably should put that in every description because so many people ask the question, how do I get this? So all the music is in house. It's not none of it is sourced from any third party. It's all and I really like how Jeff. So we have a Discord server, and Jeff, the guy who runs the Discord, he had the greatest way of saying, he's like, the bumper songs for the podcast are Kyle's equivalent of musical doodles, right?
That's right.
So it's like they're not complete songs, so they're not published anywhere, because they're like he said, they're like Kyle's equivalent of musical doodles.
And it was like the perfect thing. I'm like, dude, I can totally use all this stuff that's been sitting in the trash can.
Say crap? Yeah, pull it out of the trash and use it on the show. That's right.
I've just not hit delete on the trash can button. So I pulled it all out of there, and it was perfect because it's I use a 1 minute chunk of a song, and some of the songs are 5-6 minutes long, so I can get different bits and pieces of the songs. And
that's right.
Anyway,
yeah. And the voice that you hear at the beginning, that's Kyle's wife.
That's right.
So she does all the
Laura,
and she does all the intros for the shows, and she joined us for the entire Gods of Eden book report.
That's right.
Which was very special, and hopefully she'll be able to join us again at some point in the future for another book report or something, because it's great to have her in the studio she's got different insights and interesting questions. But yeah, so that's the team. It's basically,
and she manages Holocene, which is our LLC that we use for tours and other things that we're doing.
Yeah, she's a great organizer, and so she manages the whole Holocene team, which we do the tours with. So so that's the team. You got Brett, who's the watcher, and myself, Russ, and Kyle. We're the brothers. We're the hosts of the show, and then Laura, who does the intros and a lot of the background stuff. Okay,
so. How did you get into all this?
Man.
Well, what was your first... I mean, because I remember when we were kids, you were reading Sitchin.
Yeah, okay. So Sitchin, the 12th Planet, was probably the first book I ever read that came close to these topics. And that was when I was 16 or 17 years old. We were still living in Georgia at the time. And I remember reading that thing out there on the back porch. And just being like, whoa.
I remember you showing me the image of the guy. I can't remember his name. It's Central American Kukulkan or whatever his name is, and he's sitting in the rocket ship shaped thing, and he's holding the levers and all that kind of stuff. It was in the book.
Yeah, that's the lid of the sarcophagus that they found beneath a pyramid or whatever. Yeah, that's right. That's not Kukulkan. That's somebody else. I can't remember the guy's name, but yeah. Yeah, that's a weird one, and it looks like he's manipulating levers, and he's kind of in this weird seated position.
Yeah, who was that watcher?
And that guy, his body was in that sarcophagus, and it's very large. He was an extremely tall person, especially compared to like the average Mayan, which is another interesting. And you know what? The reason I know that is because I was recently reading a lot of Jacques Vallée, and he mentions that sarcophagus. And talking about the ancient aliens, and he's like, look, this dude was like over 6 feet, whereas the average Mayan is like 5 feet tall. So this dude is like, and I'm trying to remember what his name was, but yeah, it's a complicated name. But yes, Sitchin. And then there's also the comparative mythology, right? So we both
That's my favorite thing right there.
So we were both raised in a Christian household. so familiarity with biblical texts or whatever. And, like standard with that kind of thing is it's when you're raised into it, it's kind of a belief system and a religion. But as we began to delve more and more into these topics, we transitioned from that into looking more at the biblical text as just another, not just, but another collection of ancient texts in which people from a long time ago were trying to explain their experiences with something that they took to be supernatural. Right? So most ancient texts are like this, especially, and ones that are religious based or ones that are now used to support religions.
But you got to look at these in different ways. Like there's a number of texts in the Bible that are just letters.
That's right.
Written between people. There's other texts that are like somebody trying to lay out a set of rules, doctrine to live by.
Yeah.
And there's words of wisdom. There's songs.
Right.
That are just lyrics.
Yeah.
Basically, there's and then there's like, to me, the biblical text, the parts that I'm the most interested in are the Old Testament, sort of the origin story, the historical text. So that's a lot different than someone writing a letter and talking philosophy with somebody or laying down some rules for the new,
that's
new
right.
ruler, right? So all that stuff's in there, but it's the origin stories that are, and the historical accounts that when you start to look at other texts from completely different cultures and stuff, and you see so many similarities, it's like, okay, this is
yeah. I also remember a big thing that happened to me that really started driving my interest in looking deeper into the connections between all these kinds of ancient texts from all over the world and legends, mythology, whatever you might want to call them, whether they were oral traditions initially that were eventually written down, was when I started to see processional numbers kind of inserted into these documents. Like, this was a big deal to me because I was like, why is this, like, first you start learning about the precession of the equinoxes, which is this enormously long and astronomical cycle. And it has a bunch of numbers associated with it, and those numbers are specific. And then you'll be reading some collection of ancient texts or legends or myths, and you see like these very specific numbers inserted into these documents, and they are all processional.
Yeah,
and I started to wonder, like, well, what does this mean? Like, why are these numbers in here? And you see, it's like, I think Gordon White was talking about this. I can't remember if it was him or somebody else, but somebody, the idea that that before these were written down, these were like songs or stories told around the campfire, when we were in our hunter-gatherer stage, like they have these very ancient origins. Well, that is possibly true for a lot of traditions and stories, but it doesn't make sense to put very specific numbers into stories like that. You say there were a lot of warriors. You don't say there were 144,000 and they were behind 72 doors. That's weird for telling around the campfire, I guess. And when you see that those numbers are processional, that they in other words, they point specifically to this grand astronomical cycle, and that astronomical cycle is connected in a lot of ways with, with how things change on Earth, not just having to do with the climate or certain aspects of nature, but also specifically to humans and how they respond to the world. That's interesting. So then you're talking about yugas, right? The concept of the golden ages versus the non-golden ages, And so, like, supposedly right now we're at the bottom of the cycle, or maybe we're just coming up out of the age of iron, or the Kali Yuga, and going back up the circle, going towards the golden age.
Yeah.
Which would be at the top, which is, unfortunately 12,000 years away at this point. So the idea that these long astronomical cycles were observed in some way by our ancient ancestors, and they considered them to be extremely important, is a key to sort of, in some ways, to make sense of some of the things that the ancient texts are talking about and how they looked to the heavens for the explanation of things that they saw on Earth, which is how you get to this sort of mystical phrase, as above, so below, you know, and as below, so above. In other words, that somehow the heavens are mirrored on Earth. And I think that this really struck me because as above, so below is like it's alchemical, or it's a magical phrase. I mean, it's used in architecture, right? But the thing is that when you begin to connect,
there's a very common Christian phrase that is used all the time. That's the same thing. On earth as it is in heaven.
There you go. That's right.
It's the same phrase.
Yeah. Right.
But it's just that different words, a different way of expressing it, and
right.
You know, from the alchemists and all this.
Yeah, you could just switch it around and say, "As it is in heaven, so it is on earth," and that's as above, so below.
Yeah,
yeah, you're right. That's right. Yeah, so that really started bothering me. You know, when I was looking at these numbers and this large cycle and how these numbers just will, you know, you're reading some ancient text and you just see a random 72 in there and you're just like, what? What is this? Why is this in here? You know? So that was a big part of it. And that also taught me to kind of cross-reference these texts with each other, because if they're all showing the same numbers, then it seems like they're talking about this similar cycle. Now that, you know, in some cases you might think, well, multiple people in different places in the earth or across thousands of years in different cultures are observing the same cycle, right? It's something you can observe from anywhere on the planet. So it isn't necessarily strange that they all saw these same numbers and then put them into their documents. But the problem is that with precession, it takes some doing to recognize that it's taking place.
Yeah.
Now the question is can you do it with basic materials? Yeah. I think. I mean, but you would need to know that you need to do it in the first place, right? This is a question of like, how did this even start? Who is the first person to notice, wow, on this particular day of the year, at this exact hour, that particular star is not in the same place it was 72 freaking years ago.
Yeah.
Who's the person that first notices that?
Yeah. Well, when you decide to build an observatory in whatever fashion, whether it's standing stones or you're doing it because not all the stars in the sky move at the same rate.
That's right.
You know, that's noticeable without building anything.
Yeah. So the first thing you're going to notice if you're paying any kind of attention is that there are wandering stars.
Yeah. And they're always on the same track, and that track moves along with the track of the moon and, you know, the sun. And so you build something to sort of monitor that. And because that whole track raises and lowers throughout the year, you have to observe it on the same day every year.
Yeah.
To see what's different that year.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess a couple of generations go by after using that. I mean, you got to have something pretty well established.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You got to be able to keep records.
Yeah.
You know, even if they're oral records, right? Even if you're just telling your protege, like, hey, you know, here's what's happened and here's how I'm keeping track. But yeah, like ancient cultures have kept track of the movements of the sun and the moon. We know this for a long time. I mean, there's the thing like the, what's it called? The sun dagger in Chaco Canyon, you know, which is unfortunately now gone. It was destroyed, I think by a natural problem. It collapsed. But the point is that they were tracking using light and shadow and, you know, a system of rock and caves, basically the movement of the sun, the analemma, I think is how you pronounce it, which is the figure 8 that the sun makes in the sky, if you look at it a specific way. So people were very interested in what happened in the sky, and this gets involved in a lot of their ancient texts. And so we've talked to David Matheson about this. He's big on that. He thinks that the source of all myths is some kind of overall and incredibly ancient set of star myths, stories told using the sky as the canvas.
Yeah.
And he thinks that that pretty much every story you can find in religions is a version of a star myth, a story told using constellations and figures that you can see in the sky as the backdrop. And people have and over time, it's just been lost that that these are stories told not about real people or events or places, but actually about they're stories told using the sky and the stories
movements of the stars, and
right,
the heavens,
and that the stories aren't necessarily trying to tell you that these were real events that took place, but are more about giving you maybe a moral background or some kind of spiritual enlightenment. Yeah, he's never been really clear on that, except that he thinks that it's supposed to be he thinks that it's supposed to be instructing us on how to be better humans, right?
Yeah.
And to be in touch with the spiritual side of life or our spiritual selves, and how to maximize the benefits of being a human person on this planet.
And there's obvious connections with the narratives of these ancient texts and the stories that are more than just the numbers, that are connected to the heavenly bodies, right? I mean, just, you take away the connotative meanings of the heavens, and you're just talking about what's out there in space, and you start to look at the text in that with that idea in mind, and it's like, oh, okay. These, if you're using that as a metaphor,
yeah,
what's going on in heaven,
right?
The movements of the stars and the movements of the planets, and of course, with like Greek mythology, there's all these, they're talking about planets,
yeah, in
a lot of cases,
yeah,
and they give them, they personify them, give them character, attributes and stuff.
Yes, yeah.
But like, again, with my background in Christianity, it's like there are clear signs as to the age, the zodiacal ages,
yeah,
that they were in certain parts of the story. So there's ram imagery, there's
bull imagery,
yeah, and you can tell like they're moving from one age to another.
Yeah.
And all the imagery changes, and then there's, Pisces the fish,
yep,
which is 2,000 years old when we entered the age of Pisces, and now we're entering the age of Aquarius.
Yeah, year 0 in the Gregorian calendar is basically the beginning of the age of Pisces. Yeah, sort of. Yeah,
close enough.
Yeah, it's close. Right.
Yeah, and then of course there were prophets being like it's coming.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
They're out there telling you that the age is changing.
That's right.
And then, of course, there's a new doctrine that's adopted.
Yeah.
There's just, so it's built in. So why is all this astronomy built in to all of these texts?
And isn't it interesting that we've brought this up many times, but the symbol of Christianity often is that very simple fish. Yeah. Right? It's Pisces.
You got to change it to the water bearer now.
Right. Yeah. Now it's the water bearer. So does all this mean something more about our history? That's really what we're about on this podcast. Really, like, what is it? Because we have, there's a standard story, whether you're a religious person or a non-religious person who, there's still a standard story that's kind of taught. And the question that we go through on this podcast is how much of that standard story is correct, and how much really mystery is there in this that needs to be looked at closer.
Yeah.
So one of the ways we do that is to explore in detail ancient sites. And we do this through text, through talking about it, through reading books, through various papers. Other researchers, Graham Hancock, Ben from Uncharted X has done, he's been to a lot of these places, and he's got fantastic video, and he's convinced that in some cases, these civilizations that we're looking at it's more like they're legacies of a much older culture, or in some cases, they may be found places that were inhabited by a later culture. Like, in other words, that some of these places may be ruins of something much, much older, and they've been attributed to a much more recent culture. What actually happened is that much more recent culture re-inhabited these spots and learned from them and developed their own culture based on the imagery from these very ancient ruins, and possibly texts left over in some cases. So we explore that a lot on the podcast. Is what is there? Are we looking at something like an Atlantean civilization? Maybe not Atlantis itself being a city somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, but the idea of Atlantis being that there was a very ancient civilization that was almost completely destroyed in some kind of cataclysm a long time ago, to the point to where everybody almost completely forgot about it. Right. And so with that, we've gone into a bunch of research on, well, what was the most recent cataclysmic event on the planet? And then you get into a bunch of geology, and we have the...
Enter Randall Carlson.
Right, enter Randall Carlson and the end of the last ice age, which was relatively recent, geologically speaking, only 12,000, 12,000 years ago, basically. 12,900, 12,800 years ago was the end of the Younger Dryas. And the Younger Dryas was basically a resurgence of the Ice Age that had been for a long time declining before that. So say between 30 and 40,000 years ago, the ice expanded to its maximum extent, and then it began a long, slow decline. And then something happened that ended that decline and caused it to resurge to almost as big, almost as much ice as it had been in its maximum, what they call the last glacial maximum. The late glacial maximum. And that period lasted for about 1,200 years, and then it ended abruptly, and all the ice melted again and dumped all that water into the oceans. And this was a catastrophic event that where basically the Younger Dryas period, that 1,200 years or so, also coincides with an enormous extinction event of a lot of animals and also a bottleneck in the human population.
Yeah.
And so Randall's point, and we've done a bunch of looking into this with him through our podcast with him on Cosmographia, is about the destruction that was wrought on the planet was so immense that it's almost is so difficult to conceive that if there was a civilization that existed at the time, not something that had it doesn't have to be a civilization that had spaceships or even electricity, just a large maritime globe-trotting civilization, people who were able to sail the oceans and chart the lands and the waters, and had possibly colonies and were trading with each other, and basically a large maritime civilization, which would be considered extremely advanced for something that far back. They would have been completely wiped out, and there would be almost no trace of them whatsoever.
Yeah, when they talk about the sea levels rising 400 feet after the end of the last ice age.
That's right.
And when you look at civilization today, all of the centers of civilization are near water.
That's right.
And they're near sea level. They're either
on
a river.
coastlines or on rivers.
Yeah. And so it's like, why should we think that we would have very much left over after that type of catastrophic destruction, rise of sea of 400 feet? I mean, we would need to be looking out at the edges of the continental shelves.
That's right.
And, after 12,000 years of sediment and probably earthquakes and wave action, currents, all that kind of stuff. I mean, who knows what's down there and how deeply it's buried.
Yeah. That's right.
And really, unless it was made of stone, it's probably not going to be preserved.
That's right. And the rivers, especially in North America, the river systems are all they're all what are called underfit, underfit rivers. Basically, you have a little river, and I mean the river can be really big, actually, like, relatively speaking, like you got the Mississippi or something, and it's got its own channel, and that channel is within a much more enormous channel, sometimes miles and miles wide. And the reason for that, for most of these rivers in North America being like that, is because the meltwater from the last ice age had to flow through those channels, and it did catastrophically. In some cases, hundreds of millions of cubic feet per second, carved these gigantic, enormous channels. And if there was a river there before, and there was any civilization on or near that river, it's gone. I mean, it's completely gone. Any city, any one of our cities that was in a river I mean, when we're going through this with Randall, you'll see like a whole city is in one of these channels, and you know that if the same thing happened today as what happened then, you know, a large amount of ice melts catastrophically and all that water flows through there, the city's going to be completely gone. It's totally eradicated.
Yeah. I've spent thousands of hours scouring the surfaces of the land looking for artifacts.
Yeah.
Mostly arrowheads, flint artifacts, stone artifacts, and occasionally on a hilltop somewhere where there's no natural flint, you might find an arrowhead or just like a piece, you know, of an artifact or some worked flint, a sign that somebody made this thing.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you're not going to see anything. But as soon as you get near a body of water, that's where you are more likely to find them. That's where campsites were. I mean, you know, you just have to think, like, where would you camp? Where would you spend your time? Where are the animals?
Yeah.
That you're hunting and living by.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, in our case, when there's a big flood, you can go out after the flood and you have a better likelihood of finding an artifact because it's been uncovered after being buried from some previous flood.
Yeah, that's right. They get washed out of the bank or something like that. Yeah.
So it's really interesting too when you get into that. It's like how many thousands of years is proposed for some of these stone artifacts here. We're getting all the way up to, you know, it's like, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 years after the end of the Younger Dryas. We have these artifacts that are fairly common.
Yeah.
Around the place, and they're getting washed out on the riverbanks, and they're under tens of feet in some cases of sediment.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, there's just so much when you start going down that rabbit hole of how much stuff has moved around in the Holocene period, which is this last 12,000 years. There have been some gigantic floods,
right,
that are not even anywhere close to the scale of the meltdown floods.
Right. That's right.
I mean, we farm on a river basin, basically, that's just this gigantic flat area, and
it's all flood
anywhere
deposits.
we've excavated there, you get down 6 feet, you hit river gravel.
Right. Yeah.
Way far away from the river.
Yeah.
Right. So you never know. That could have been a campsite because the riverbank was there at some point, and these things weave around inside this much larger, what is called the river basin.
Yeah.
And who knows where it was back then. So that's
yeah, and it's part of the idea of, so going again about, you know, geologically speaking and evolutionarily speaking, there's this idea of uniformitarianism, which is basically the concept that these processes take long periods of time and they happen very slowly and gradually. So you don't see them take place, but over long periods of time, there's large amounts of change. Except that more and more evidence is coming out that what we actually have is something more like what they call punctuated equilibrium, which is where you have long periods of static, where it doesn't change really, and then you have some catastrophic event where everything changes very quickly in a matter of days.
Yeah.
And you can easily see this in looking at just, you know, local regional floods. You may have a creek bed near your house or something like that, and a little bit of water flows through it, or maybe it's dry a lot of the time and it doesn't change. You know, it's just sitting there. You see this, you walk past it, you see the same rocks every day. They don't move. You know, the water doesn't change anything. It goes up and down a tiny bit depending on if you're getting more or less rain. Sometimes it's totally dry if you're in a drought. Sometimes it's got a lot of water in it if you're getting good rain. But then one day you get a whole bunch of rain. And then suddenly it changes. You know, once the flood is over, you go back there and all those familiar rocks you'd been seeing for years are totally gone.
And sometimes it's not even there anymore. The creek's changed direction.
Right. The creek's in a different spot. You know, it's 10 feet away from where it used to be. So that's the idea. This is a, you know, catastrophic change or punctuated equilibrium. And you can also understand this in the life of a person. You know, there's there are long static periods, you know, where there is change, but it's very slow and gradual. But then one day you get in an accident, you wreck your bicycle or you have a car wreck or something like that, and you break a whole bunch of bones, and you know, you have catastrophic change to your entire physical body. More change than you've had over the past 20 years can take place in a matter of seconds, right? It's a catastrophic event. And the other thing that there is in geology is the concept of scale invariance. That no matter what scale you look at things, you can see the same patterns, right? So scale invariance implies that we can take this local catastrophic event thing and then long periods of static no change and scale it up to the entire globe in terms of large global, not just regional or local catastrophic events, but global catastrophic events that take place that affect the entire planet and cause an enormous amount of change over a very short period of time. So one good example of this is the 65 million year ago asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, right? That is an accepted catastrophic event that caused an extinction event that and this isn't fully studied, but how it changed the surface of the globe is not totally clear. But
there's a story that I had that I didn't do today, but it's where they've now discovered these gigantic ripples.
Oh yeah,
deep down in the crust.
Yeah, that's right.
Radiating out from the Chicxulub crater.
Mm. That's right. I saw that article too.
They're really deep. Yeah. They're just, I mean, just, I don't know. I was just.
Yeah. So that's an accept. So in geology, which is mostly a uniformitarian, you know, they have this, they call it the doctrine of uniformity, which the basic idea is that, you know, that most processes that take place are analogous to the processes that happen right now. And we shouldn't look at certain geological features and try to explain them using catastrophic forces. Instead, we should try to explain them using the kinds of forces we see at play on the surface today, which are slow and gradual. But more and more, it's coming to be accepted that there have been catastrophic events that have drastically changed the surface.
And they're more frequent than previously estimated.
Right. So one thing about the Younger Dryas, the end of the most recent ice age, is that it was a very catastrophic event, and this has been a long fight in academia over this event, because most academics in geology have wanted to sort of stretch it out as long as possible. And I mean, you know, if you read literature from 100 years ago, they thought that it was hundreds of thousands of years that the ice age was ending. But as you get more and more recent and there's more and more field data, that time has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk until now there's lots of data that shows that it was extremely fast, geologically speaking. And that leaves open a lot of questions on where did the energy come from to do this?
Yeah.
You know,
the energy paradox.
Right. There's an energy paradox because you have a certain amount of ice.
You need a certain amount of energy to melt all that ice.
Right. And the problem is that there's no known, like, uniform local geological forces that can put out that much energy to melt all that ice all at once.
None that we wouldn't see clear signs of, like some ridiculously
enormous amounts of volcanoes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it implies that there was extraterrestrial sources for the energy, meaning impacts. Yeah. So if there was a large impact or a series of impacts that ended the last ice age, that puts gigantic global changing impact events much more recent in our history, something that actual modern humans lived through.
And then when you look back at the ancient texts, it seems like that's what many of them are talking about.
Yeah.
Fire from the sky.
Right. And then it's also interesting because a lot of them are saying, and it will happen again.
That's right.
Which is also true.
Yeah.
Right? You talk to any astronomer and they'll say, it's not a matter of if, but when this will happen again. Right? It isn't a question of will we ever get hit by another large meteor.
This prediction of the destruction of the world at the end of, it's like, it's going to come and nobody knows when it will be.
That's right. No one knows the day or the hour.
That's right.
And yet it is coming.
Because what is known is that these things are cyclical.
Right.
And like one of the interesting things I think about that is the whole comet Enki, connection.
Yes. Yeah.
This gigantic cyclical, this thing's orbiting the sun, essentially, and it takes a long time for it to come back, but it's left with like a fragmentary tail, and you just never know when.
Yeah, and there's been those recent stories of some other enormous, either Kuiper or Oort cloud body,
that's
gigantic comet that's like been eased into our solar system, that's going to be cruising into the interior.
Yep.
And this process has just begun, or they're just now noticing it. So it's probably tens of thousands of years away. But the fact is that if this has just happened just now, it's been happening in the past as well. So, is there a long line of these things all on their long and slow way into the inner solar system? And in other words, this one that we've just noticed, it's tens of thousands of years off. But tens of thousands of years ago, this happened to another one, and it's close to getting, to coming into the solar system, beginning its process of breaking up, and then leaving a whole bunch of debris in the inner solar system, which we can start running into.
Yeah.
And did that happen 12,000 years ago, which is what would have caused the series of impacts that ends the Ice Age?
And you could imagine that if you witness something like that take place, that, changed the entire globe, catastrophically, wiped out most people, wiped out civilization, you might want to tell that story to the future generations. You might want that story to be carried on for a number of reasons. One, to remember what came before, but also to warn about what could come again in the future.
Will be coming
again.
Yeah,
and so this is like, you start to look at this type of thing and see, okay, you can kind of grasp now why maybe certain documents were so important to people in the ancient past that they went to great lengths to preserve them to their own, even, imminent death.
That's right.
To preserve these documents that are talking about just that.
Yeah.
The time before and the time soon to come.
That's right.
No
the
one
end
knows
is
it.
nigh.
That's right. So that is a really interesting way of looking, I think, at the ancient texts. And when you have that in your mind, when you're going through some of these things, and you can just see the imagery. It's like, yes, this is one way you might describe a fiery cometary fragment coming down is a chariot of fire, or whatever. There's so many different ways that it's. I don't know. They just pop out of the text. You're reading stuff and you're like, oh man, that could be a comet.
That's right.
It could be a meteor.
They describe it as a dragon.
Yeah.
It's sky serpents, broom stars.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of imagery that you
and there's this sort of negative connotation to one being in the sky, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is it's portentous.
That's right. Yeah.
This is
that's right.
Imminent doom.
Yeah. That's right. Satan shall appear as an angel of light.
Why would that be? Yeah. Why would that be if we've never experienced one?
Right.
And they would be like, oh, look at the pretty flower sky thing.
That's right.
Oh.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
We probably should take a break. I don't know.
Yeah, we should. We're way over.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll be right back.